This is the epilogue, and I'm trying to make this very short because it pretty much covered everything in all the parts. The prologue, the part 1, past and present litigation, part 2, FDA contracts, part 3, chemistry and toxicology, part 4, Administrative Procedures Act, part 5, FDA executive orders, part 6, FDA electronic submissions, part 7, Tobacco Control Act 2009, Part 8, FDA Draft Guidances, Part 9, FDA Final Rule, and its subparts. But I would like to, somewhat of a summary. I'd like to speak to what's in the FDA Final Rule real quick, a little bit as a summary, and then I'll speak a few more statements and then end this entire project. So under 29074, the FD&C Act requirements that will apply to newly deemed products include establishment registration and product listing, ingredient listing, submissions prior to the introduction of new products, and labeling requirements. Free samples of newly deemed products will also be prohibited. The additional provisions of this final rule include minimum age and identification requirements, vending machine restrictions, and required warning statements for packages and advertisements. Under the final rule, which including e-cigarettes, these products further include e-liquids, atomizers, batteries, cautomizers, that's atomizers plus, replaceable fluid-filled cartridges, tank systems, flavors for e-liquid, vials that contain e-liquids, programmable software. A tobacco product means any product made or derived from tobacco that is intended for human consumption, including any component, part, or accessory of a tobacco product, except for the raw materials other than tobacco used in manufacturing a component, part, or accessory of a tobacco product. And I spoke about all that, of course, in part 9, FDA Final Rule. What's really going on here between the PMTA process, the pre-market tobacco application processes, as well as the less costly, less complex, less paperwork process called the substantial equivalence process, or the substantial equivalence reports, or the certification process for 0 mg nicotine levels, or the registration that is on December 31st, 2016, vape shops have to list all the products that are on their shelves, or the products that are up for sale, or they will sell, or they have been selling. Outside of all that tedious, complex process of applications going into the FDA, and in turn, the FDA will have a new FDA center that they're going to build so they can accommodate all new employees to handle the that will handle the 1,633,554 hours that will take to process all the applications that will be coming into the FDA between August 8th, 2016 up until May 10th of 2018. And all of that, the new center for the employees to do all this work, plus the research labs, the institutions, the organizations, whatever have you, that I talked about extensively in Part 2, FDA contracts, because the FDA will contract with these research labs for toxicology reports, testing, whatever have you, and I mentioned it all in the Part 2, so it's very exhaustive. In the Part 2, I go into it actually in subparts because it goes for so long. I think it's actually See, it's actually in two subparts, the FDA contracts in part 2. Anyway, and then these particular institutions or research labs or whatever can actually profit from those tests and lab tests and paperwork and processing or whatever you want to call it. And I go into it all in the part 2 FDA contracts. So they profit from it. The FDA profits from it indirectly through a banking system that's in place that I also talk about in part 2 FDA contracts. So when you take it as it is, as a whole picture, you have the monetary aspect and then you have the public health. Now, according to the Tobacco Control Act of 2009, it must be cost effective. In other words, the benefits have to outweigh the costs. Understand? But in order to get those health benefits into place, they have to spend over, like I stated before, I think it was like 994 million or whatever the heck it is for the whole process to work. In other words, it's going to cost over $1 billion for this whole process to work according to the FDA final rule. From August 8th, 2016 to May 10th of 2018, it's going to cost over $1 billion to process all the information, as opposed to the health benefits or the public health. So you must ask yourself, as sincerely as possible, is it really about the promotion of public health, or is it about making money and retaining that power structure that's involved in the federal government? Through those enabling powers that the FDA has, as I spoke about earlier, they're not only able to, under the law, they're not only able to make law, but they can also enforce the law. That is some serious power. And it's sort of like this. So between the power and the money, that is really the predominant picture, or the predominant elements to the entire picture. Has very little to do with public health. In fact, the FDA includes food. And they had a whole bunch of, they called it the sugar wars in the 60s and 70s. And they were saying that sugar, this is back in the 60s and 70s, that if they continue to have this sugar in all these items like canned soda and tasty cakes and cookies or whatever have you, even in a can of peas has sugar. I mean, some cans of peas have sugar free, but they might put corn syrup in there, which is basically a sugar. But anyway, they were saying in the 60s and 70s that eventually, if the FDA permits all this sugar to be in the supermarkets, that you'll have diabetes, you'll have obesity, you'll have heart disease, in turn you'll have heart attacks at a much younger age as each generation goes by, from the 70s into the 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s and beyond. It's actually the younger or the youth population that will actually wind up having more and more problems with obesity, heart disease, diabetes, or whatever have you. And they predicted this back in the 60s and the early 1970s. And the FDA stated to the scientists that said this is what's going to happen if you have sugar out there in such abundance. And the FDA said, sugar doesn't cause any of that. Really, FDA actually said that in papers back in those days. They said it won't create obesity and diabetes and heart disease in the youth. Right? And then when finally the 90s came along and the 2000s came along, we have kids that are they could be 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that are obese, that have heart disease, and have diabetes at that young age. And it's due to all that sugar, which the FDA approved of. Now, as far as vaping products, if the Cole-Bishop Amendment does not go through and enacted into law, in the year of 2018, May 11th, 2018, unless they have any application submitted to the FDA, all those products that will have that 1 year grace period, as long as they have submitted those applications to the FDA, will remain on the market for 1 year. But if any company has no application submitted by May 10th of 2018 to the FDA that's pending review, they have to come off the marketplace. So we'll shrink the entire marketplace down to maybe 15-20% of the companies to be left in the marketplace. And choices, as I've stated in the Part 5 FDA executive orders, they talked about, especially Obama, in his executive order, and I think it was in 2011, he stated there should be a freedom of choice. Well, your choices will be constricted greatly after May 10th of 2018, and especially after May 10th of 2019. And that marketplace will shrink so much that there might be even vapors. I won't be doing it, but vape, because I'm going to do strictly, if I have to, I'll just do it yourself, which is not regulated by the FDA. But there will be some vapors that will wind up going back to analog cigarettes, to combusted cigarettes, combusted tobacco products. And any potential vapors that could have came into the vaping market will just remain as regular smokers, analog smokers, who will wind up with heart disease and a bunch of lung cancer and throat cancer and you name it. And the other thing is, as I've said throughout this whole project, the FDA does not have substantial scientific data that states that vaping products or e-liquid is harmful to your health. In fact, it says repeatedly, as I've read through this Part 9 of the FDA final rule, it states that throughout their own FDA's final rule, it actually states that in the overall, vaping products are less harmful than combusted cigarettes. So is it really about health? Is it really about the public health? Or is it about maintaining power and making money through taxes, through taxpayers? Because taxpayers will, through the tax-paying system, through the IRS, will actually wind up also supplementing all these things outside of the fact of the user fees that will be applied to the FDA application process. So is it really about public health, or is it about power and money, or politics as usual? That's a question you must ask yourself, as a vapor, as a person, or as an American. Now, I've answered that question some time ago when I started to read the FDA final rule, when it first came out on May 5th of 2016, and I realized that it was about power and money, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the public health. And on that note, you guys have a good one. Bye.